The wind scraped across the dry Wyoming plains, lifting dust into the morning light, like smoke from an invisible fire. Clint Myers stood at the edge of his worn-out porch, a faded flannel shirt hanging loosely from his frame. His eyes, the color of gunmetal, scanned the horizon for no particular reason, just habit, born of decades spent watching over land that had long since stopped giving anything back. Below the porch, a crooked fence slouched against the earth like it was tired of pretending to stand. The barn's roof sagged in the middle, a few rusted tin sheets flapping loose. Beyond that, the pasture was nothing but brittle grass and silent emptiness. And in the far corner of the field stood the last living thing Clint still talked to, a small gray donkey named Hope. She was old like him. Her left ear had a slight bend from an injury years ago, and her hooves were cracked despite his best efforts to keep them trimmed. Clint leaned forward and gave a sharp whistle. The donkey lifted her head slowly, and then began her slow walk toward him, each step deliberate, as though she was unsure the earth would still be there when her hoof came down. Clint didn't smile. Not anymore. The lines carved into his face hadn't moved in years, except to frown or narrow against the sun. He reached into a metal feed bucket and scattered a small handful of oats onto the porch. Hope climbed the steps with the ease of routine and began to eat at his feet. "Still with me, huh?" he murmured. Hope chewed slowly, pausing now and then to look up at him, her big, dark eyes filled with something that might have been affection, or maybe just habit. Clint crouched beside her, one hand resting on her mane, the other on his knee. He exhaled through his nose. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when the ranch buzzed with life, horses, cattle, border collies, herding with joyful barks, even laughter. Sarah used to sit on this very porch, sipping coffee in the early morning, wrapped in her blue shawl. She was gone now, 6 years this past spring. Cancer took her quick, too quick for either of them to make peace with it. After Sarah, Clint tried to hold on, sold off the cattle when the drought worsened, let the ranch hands go when the money dried up. The horses were next, then the dogs. All except Hope. She'd been Sarah's favorite, born in the back stall one stormy night when the vet couldn't make it. Sarah had insisted on sleeping in the barn until the foal made it through. She named her Hope before the sun even came up. Clint rose slowly, his joints resisting like rusted hinges. He walked back into the house and returned a minute later, holding a yellowed piece of paper and a stubby pencil. He sat down at the small table on the porch and, after a long pause, began to write. The pencil moved slowly, the letters uneven, as though unsure they wanted to be read. Asterisk if you find this donkey. Her name is Hope. She's all I have left. I don't expect nothing, but if by chance you send her back with a friend or two, I'll know someone out there still cares. If she comes back alone, well, I reckon that says enough. Asterisk. He folded the paper twice, slipped it into a sandwich bag, and sealed it tight with duct tape. Then he stood, walked down the steps, and whistled again. Hope had wandered to the edge of the barn, but returned at the sound. He reached for her halter, gently tied the bag to one of the straps, and then opened the front gate. The desert beyond the ranch stretched wide and silent. No fences, no paths, just open land. Clint gave her one final pat on the flank. "Go on, girl," he said softly. "See what's left out there." Hope didn't move right away. She turned her head and looked at him. Really looked, like she understood. Then, with a slow, stubborn determination, she began to walk down the dusty trail leading away from the ranch. She never looked back again. Clint stood there long after she disappeared beyond the ridge. His shoulders, once broad and proud, slumped forward. He walked back to the porch, dropped into the old rocking chair, and stared out toward the horizon. The sun was high now, but the light felt cold. He didn't expect her to return. That night, the wind picked up. It whistled through the cracks in the barn walls, rattled the loose shutters, and howled through the dead trees like a ghost trying to find its name. Clint sat by the fire, staring into the orange flames, a half-empty bottle of whiskey by his side. He thought of Sarah, the way she'd braid her hair before chores, the soft way she'd say his name when she wanted him to listen. He hadn't cried in years. Not at the funeral. Not when he buried their dog under the cottonwood tree. Not when the bank took the last of the good horses. But now, with only the fire and the storm outside, A single tear tracked down his cheek. He wiped it away and took another drink. The next morning came gray and flat. The sky was smeared with clouds, and the silence was thick. No birds, no wind. Clint stepped outside, boots crunching the frostbitten dirt. He scanned the empty landscape, heart whispering something he refused to name, something like foolish hope. There was nothing. He sighed, spat, and turned back toward the barn. The world, he figured, had given him its answer. Clint didn't mention hope again. Not to the wind, not to the whiskey, and certainly not to himself. He simply went on with the motions, feeding the chickens that no longer laid, checking on a water trough that hadn't filled in 2 months, and walking the same tired stretch of fence line as though anything out there still needed mending. His days had become like the dust that covered everything, dry, weightless, and easy to ignore. The second morning after Hope had vanished into the open plains, Clint sat at the kitchen table, staring at an untouched plate of eggs that had gone cold hours ago. The silence in the house was heavier than ever, pressing into the wooden walls, like the past was trying to seep through. On the table sat Sarah's old pocket Bible, unopened since the day she passed. He looked at it, then away, as if even glancing at it might draw blood. He stood and opened the back door, letting the early light spill across the floor. The world outside looked the same, quiet and vast, with nothing to suggest it still noticed him. He stepped outside, took in a lungful of crisp morning air, and paused as a sound, small, distant, and odd, tickled the edge of his awareness. A bray. Faint, possibly imagined. He turned his head slightly, scanning the ridges and brush, but saw nothing. Probably a coyote playing tricks again. Or maybe it was the wind, trying to sound like something more hopeful than it was. Either way, Clint shook it off and walked toward the barn. The scent of old hay and oil greeted him, like an old dog too tired to rise. He ran a hand along the empty stall gate, where Hope used to sleep, and felt the smallest ache stir inside his chest. As he pulled open the feed bin, the memory struck, Sarah sitting on a stool, cradling newborn Hope in her lap, whispering softly to her like she was a frightened child. That night had been a storm, worse than most. Trees cracked. Rain hit the tin roof, so hard it sounded like the end of the world. But inside that stall, with Sarah's hands working steady and her voice calm, Hope had survived. That night was when Clint first learned something he'd never forgotten. Even the smallest things could carry the weight of salvation. He stepped out of the barn, shielding his eyes from the rising sun. Another sound came on the wind, this time clearer, a thudding rhythm. Hoofs. No, couldn't be. He squinted, but again, the land offered nothing but silence. It was messing with him. Getting old meant your ears lied more often than not. Clint rubbed the back of his neck, trying to shake the unease. It was the third day. 3 days since he let Hope go with nothing but a note and a worn halter. He'd thought by now he'd stop listening for her. But part of him, some cursed, stubborn part, still strained at every sound like a soldier waiting for the whistle. Inside the house, he poured himself a mug of stale coffee and sank into the chair by the window. The sun moved slowly across the floorboards, and somewhere in the quiet, time stretched thin. His gaze drifted to the photograph on the mantel. Sarah, smiling beneath the wide-brimmed hat, arm wrapped around a younger Clint whose eyes still held fire. Hope stood between them, just a fold then, barely reaching Clint's waist. The picture had always made him proud. Now it just made him tired. He rose again, this time with no real reason, and walked out to the field. His boots kicked up dry clumps of earth. The wind had shifted, cooler now, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. He scanned the horizon, his eyes sweeping right to left out of instinct. Still nothing. Still empty. Then he heard it. Not wind. Not coyotes. A low, unmistakable bray. His body froze. The sound came again, louder this time, and not alone. There was another behind it. And another. It was as if the wind itself had started to speak. Only this time it wasn't whispering, it was calling. Clint took 2 steps forward, eyes narrowing. A dust cloud had begun to rise along the far ridge, faint but growing. It shimmered in the heat like a mirage. He didn't trust it, not at first. He'd seen illusions before. Too many summers staring across the baked land taught him not to believe the tricks light could play. But this wasn't light. The dust thickened. Movement swelled beneath it, shapes, motion, legs. Many legs. Clint blinked hard, unable to comprehend. What was he looking at? And then, like a dream sharpening into reality, he saw the first one emerge from the haze, a donkey. Small, brown, ears alert. Behind it came another. And another. Soon, the entire ridge line was swarming with them. Donkeys. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Pouring down the slope like water breaking through a dam. Clint staggered back a step, heart thudding hard against his ribs. He grabbed the porch post to steady himself. The sound of their hooves, once soft and ghost-like, now roared through the canyon, a stampede of strange purpose. And at the front of the mass, leading them with head held high and tail flicking in command, was Hope. Clint's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared, breath caught somewhere deep inside him. Hope galloped like a creature reborn, hooves striking the dirt with grace and certainty. She came straight for the ranch, never once slowing, the others following in a tide of brays and pounding earth. The scene defied logic. It spit in the face of understanding. Yet here it was, real as the ache in his knees and the sweat forming on his brow. Clint didn't move. Couldn't. He watched, spellbound, as the herd thundered closer, until the land itself seemed to pulse with life. Hope broke ahead of the others, reached the gate, and stopped. Her chest heaved. Her ears twitched. She looked straight at Clint. He took one shaky step forward, then another. Eyes locked with hers. "You came back," he whispered, almost afraid the sound would break the moment. She didn't answer, just took a slow, heavy breath and blinked. And the rest of them kept coming. Clint stepped forward, the dust of the approaching herd curling around his boots like a living thing. His heart beat with an urgency he hadn't felt in years, not since the day Sarah collapsed in the garden, or maybe even further back, when he first kissed her under the cottonwood tree. But this moment, this impossible, bewildering moment, held something different. Not fear, not grief. Something he barely dared name, awe. The donkeys slowed as they approached the ranch, their hooves striking the dry earth in a synchronized rhythm that made the ground tremble. They didn't stampede. They didn't scatter. They moved with purpose, as if they knew this was where they were meant to be. A few peeled off, trotting toward the shaded side of the barn. Others moved to the troughs, noses dipping in with relief. Some stood still, gazing around as if remembering something from long ago. Hope didn't move from the gate. Her body was coated in dust, her mane tangled from the wind, but her eyes, those deep dark eyes, held a glimmer Clint hadn't seen in her for years. He approached slowly, reaching out a cautious hand. She leaned into it without hesitation. "You brought them," he murmured, voice low and thick. I don't understand." Hope pressed her head gently against his chest. Then Clint noticed the rope around her neck, different from the old halter he'd sent her with. Tied neatly against the side was a small pouch, stiff with sand and grime. Hands trembling, he unfastened it and removed a folded piece of paper inside. The writing was rough, scrawled in black ink. "Asterisk found your note. Thought it was a joke. But she looked me in the eye, and I couldn't walk away. Sent word to every donkey rescue from here to Arizona. These are the ones no one wanted. Too old, too wild, too broken. Figured if you had space in your heart to send her out, maybe you had space for the rest of them too. Asterisk. Asterisk good luck, old-timer. The world still notices, asterisk." Clint read the letter twice, then folded it slowly, as though afraid it might vanish if he moved too fast. He looked up, the field now scattered with donkeys, each one different, each one weary but alive. One had a white blaze across its face and a torn ear. Another limped slightly on its right hind leg. A third had a scar along its side that looked like an old burn. Each one bore the marks of having survived something harsh. He backed away from the gate and opened it wide. Hope stepped through, the others following without hesitation. They didn't need permission. It was as if they'd known this was home the moment they saw it. Clint watched them explore, his hand still clenched around the letter. The troughs were nearly dry, the fencing half collapsed in places. The barn's roof leaked. He had maybe 2 bags of feed left, and no hay in reserve. And yet, he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt awake. He moved quickly now, adrenaline sharpening his every step. He pulled the old wheelbarrow from behind the barn, dusted off the rusted scoop, and began mixing feed with water. As he worked, the donkeys gathered, watching him with quiet patience, as if sensing they didn't have to be afraid anymore. By evening, the sky had turned golden, the sun bleeding into the western hills. Clint stood on the porch, a cold glass of water in hand, watching the herd settle. Some lay in the shade, others wandered through the field, testing the fence line, braying softly to one another. Hope remained close, chewing on dry grass like she belonged here all along. He sat heavily in his chair and took a long sip, the coolness of the water grounding him. The letter lay on the table beside him, weighted down with a horseshoe. It was real, all of it, not a dream, not a vision born of solitude. Flesh and blood and hooves and breath. As the stars began to prick the sky, a pair of headlights shimmered in the distance, winding down the old gravel road that hadn't seen visitors in years. Clint narrowed his eyes. A small truck, blue, pulling a horse trailer. It came to a stop by the fence. He rose as the driver stepped out, a woman in her 30s, jeans worn and boots scuffed, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face. She looked at the herd, then at Clint, and smiled. "You must be the man with the note." Clint didn't speak right away. He studied her, unsure whether she was real or part of the strange magic unfolding around him. "Name's Maria Alvarez," she continued. "I run Canyon Riders Rescue. One of our volunteers found your donkey wandering near the San Rafael Cliffs. When he read the letter, he sent it to me. I thought no way, but I was wrong." Clint's voice cracked when he finally found it. "You sent all these." She stepped forward, boots crunching over gravel. "Not just me. I passed the word along. Some of these donkeys came from 4 states away. We've been trying to find places for the worst cases, too aggressive to adopt out, or too scared to handle. But they came willingly when she led them." Hope walked over then, nuzzling Clint's arm. Maria watched, her eyes softening. "She's special, that one." "She was my wife's," Clint said. "Born right here." Maria nodded. "She's got the kind of spirit you don't see often." She knew where to go, and they followed her. The silence stretched between them for a moment, comfortable, reflective. "I don't have much," Clint said. "Barely enough feed, and the fence is a wreck." "You've got land," Maria replied. "And time. I can send supplies. Get the word out for volunteers. You're not alone anymore, Clint." He looked at her then, truly looked, as though her words had cracked something open inside him. He extended a hand. "Then let's get to work." She shook it firmly, and the stars above began to multiply. That night, long after Maria drove off with a promise to return in the morning, Clint lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. The wind had quieted. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of hooves and breath and second chances. Outside, Hope stood watch under the cottonwood tree, her ears twitching toward the night. And Clint dreamed for the first time in years, not of what was lost, but of what might still be found. Clint woke before sunrise, something he hadn't done in years without a reason. But this time, he didn't feel the weight of dread pressing against his chest. He sat up slowly, bones cracking like brittle branches, and listened, not for the silence he used to find, but for the life that had returned. The ranch was humming, not loud, not chaotic, just alive. Braying floated on the breeze, gentle and distant. Hooves shuffled against earth. A low snort came from beneath the window. He pulled the curtain aside. Hope was there, lying in the dirt just outside the house, head resting on her front legs, as if she'd spent the night keeping watch. He moved to the porch with a mug of hot water. No coffee left, but it didn't matter now. The sky bled from black to deep purple, then faded into gold along the horizon. The air was crisp, the kind that made your lungs work a little harder, like it was reminding you you're still alive. By mid-morning, Maria returned, just like she said she would. Her truck now pulled a second trailer filled with hay bales, buckets, feed sacks, and fencing wire. 2 younger volunteers rode with her, one wiry boy who couldn't be more than 16, and a girl with tattoos on her arms and eyes that looked like they'd seen both trouble and healing. Clint met them at the gate, wiping his hands on a rag. Hope you didn't expect this place to be ready for visitors. Maria grinned. We didn't come for comfort. We came for purpose. That afternoon, the ranch stirred with motion. The boy, Cody, climbed onto the roof of the barn without being asked and began hammering loose shingles back in place. The girl, Lena, worked beside Clint repairing the broken corral, her quiet efficiency speaking more than words ever could. Maria spent her time tending to the donkeys, treating wounds, adjusting halters, checking hooves. Clint had forgotten what it felt like to have company that didn't demand anything from him. They worked without questions, without judgment, only stopping for water or a soft chuckle when something funny happened, like when a small, mischievous donkey tried to steal Clint's rag out of his pocket. As the days passed, more volunteers arrived. Word had spread. Some came for a day. Others stayed a week. Every person brought something the ranch lacked: tools, lumber, blankets, care. In return, they were given something harder to define: peace, or perhaps the quiet honor of helping something rebuild. One morning, Clint found himself standing with Maria beneath the old oak tree. Its branches stretched wide over Sarah's grave, casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. I was going to sell this place last year, Clint said. Had the papers drawn up and everything. But you didn't, Maria said. No, he replied. I couldn't let it go. Not without knowing I tried everything. Maria looked toward the field, where over 100 donkeys now grazed peacefully. And now, I don't think I'm the one rescuing them anymore, he said. Feels like maybe they rescued me. Hope approached then, nudging Clint's hand. He scratched behind her ear and smiled, a small, tired smile that was just starting to remember how to be real again. By the second week, the ranch had a new name, painted by hand onto a sign that hung above the main gate. Second Chance Ranch. Not Clint's idea, but he didn't fight it. It fit. A woman arrived one morning with her teenage son. They had driven from Utah after seeing a story on social media about the donkey herd. The boy was quiet, withdrawn, wouldn't speak. But when they were introduced to a gentle, spotted donkey with cloudy eyes, the boy reached out slowly and touched its nose. The donkey stood still, patient. A moment passed, and then the boy whispered something no one quite caught. But his mother started to cry. Clint stood nearby, pretending not to watch. But he saw, and he understood. Each donkey had its story: a scar, a limp, a fear of loud sounds. And each person who came brought their own. Something broken, something lost. Somehow, the two pieces kept finding each other, like scattered parts of the same puzzle. Late one evening, as the last light of day pulled long shadows across the ranch, Clint sat with Maria near the porch. The work was done for the day. The donkeys had quieted. The stars were starting to show. You know, Maria said, we keep rescue records, medical notes, transport histories, that kind of thing. But we've never had a story like this. Clint nodded slowly. That letter, it wasn't a plan. It was just me giving up, one last time. Letting go. You called out to the world, she said. And the world answered. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the cicadas and the occasional bray in the distance. Clint finally stood. I should get some sleep. Got fence work tomorrow. You're not alone anymore, Maria reminded him gently. He didn't answer, just smiled softly and walked inside. That night, before bed, he placed the original note, faded and dusty, into a frame and hung it in the kitchen. A small plaque beneath it read, "The day everything changed." Outside, under a sky full of stars, Hope lay beside the barn, surrounded by the herd she had brought home. She had led them across miles of desert, through heat and hunger and silence, guided by something neither map nor man could explain. And Clint, lying in his bed, eyes closed, felt peace settle over him like a blanket. Not the cold, empty kind he'd carried for years, but a warm, living kind. A kind that hummed with breath and bray and the rhythm of hooves on dirt. The ranch wasn't full of animals. It was full of survivors, of second chances, of quiet miracles wrapped in dust and fur. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.